the Amiga 1200, a great machine and a decent upgrade to the classic 500. But it was a little overlooked by developers, as for the most part it got upgraded games rather than ones designed just for it. But that's not to say there weren't any. So let's take a look at a few of the games that you couldn't play on the classic hardware. What we must play on AGA. And welcome to Goldfish on Games. Slam Tilt launches in first, and for this video I decided it could be fun to check out games by genre, with this obviously being pinball, and it was recommended to me after my Amiga answer to pinball video, and they were absolutely right to tell me that I needed to check this one out. It was developed by Liquid Design, and it was released in 1996, and the presentation is off the chart, with an intro and a very flash looking main menu. It puts the basic text menu of its peers to shame. Now there's the almost standard 4 tables. Mean Machines, a particularly dark table with a motor racing theme, and it has some fun LCD games, including an almost Mode 7 style racer. The Pirate, a brighter table that is more nautical in nature. And what amazes me is that there's also some amount of height to these tables, as the ball loops in very interesting ways, but it does tend to fly past that third flipper. Ace of Space. I saw the sign and it turned out to be a neon sci-fi style table, rather than the more space themed one that was expected. There are more fun LCD games here with you having to hit targets, and this might be my favourite table. And Night of the Demon, a sea monster style that launches the ball midway up the table. And this might be the more simple of the whole lot, as there isn't even a third flipper, and there seems to be less ramps and things to go for as well. The physics feels great, just as good as the Digital Illusion games, as you can fling the ball around these decently sized tables, and more often than not you can hit the targets that you're going for, if you're better at the game than I am anyway. It also has multi-ball, and it will switch to a high resolution mode when that happens, so you can see more of the table at once. Or you can switch to it anytime you want, using the right key. All while this is going on, there's a suitably rocking soundtrack in the background, and it's just top notch all around. Sixth Sense Investigations is snooping in next, as a point-and-click adventure. And I picked this one as I've possibly over-limited this video to titles that will run on a stock A1200. No fast RAM, no accelerators, not even a CD-ROM drive. And this one thankfully came out on both floppy disk as well as CD. Cinetech made the game in 1998, and keeping in the tradition of these type of games, it came on 10 discs, which does make that CD version far more appealing, with the added bonus that they added a talkie version to it as well.
Please appear now.
Oh, it's that simple.
Well, it looks simple, but actually it's quite hard.
Hi, folks.
Hi, Arthur.
Hello, Arthur. Mrs. Goldenhow's beloved cat Candy was kidnapped. Can you help us find it?
Shouldn't feel that hard.
Even if it isn't the best voice acting I've ever heard. But then this was a joint German and Italian production. And it was a team that decided they didn't want to make an easy game, so you can expect some challenging puzzles. And after a lengthy intro, that thankfully the developers gave us a second icon so we could skip, we are in the game. and it's a very nicely done interface, with scum-style verbs with the inventory next to it. It also supports the system where common actions for an item is on the right click, so you don't have to keep moving down to that verb panel. During the gameplay, you will jump between a few of the 6th Sense staff, including a ghost that I swear looks familiar. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. And as with all good adventure games, there is a conversation tree that will let you ask various questions, as well as having lots of places to visit, explore, and then pick up everything that isn't nailed down. Unless there's a puzzle that you need to solve first to get it. And this is all wrapped up in a decent art style that is very similar to Sam and Max, and like them, we have a mystery to solve. And it all starts with having to rescue a man stuck under a massive block of cheese. And simply moving the block out the way isn't enough. No, you'll need to find a metal pole, but you can't use that to pry the man out. Instead, you'll have to sharpen it on a bit of rock and then break up the cheese. Which then will let him out. But at what cost? At what cost? The Bograts are shuffling in as I do enjoy a good puzzle game, and while I was tempted with blobs, I decided this would be more fun to check out, particularly seeing the rest of the puzzle games were all takes on columns or puzzle bubble. This is a Vulcan game that was released in 1996, and it has that usual Vulcan flair with its animated intro and their typical art style. But I wouldn't say that this is one that's particularly pushing the AGA hardware, as it's mostly just you, the Bograt parent, and your 2 kids that you have to guide to the exit. Now, as you might expect, you don't have direct control over the Sprogs. You just have to set up a path that they will then follow, which starts with you just having to press a few switches, and then moves on to having to place bombs to blow up bricks. But later on, you will have to get the kids involved as well, as they're not completely useless. I mean, they are just constantly walking and will just head straight for danger if it's possible. But the blue one can attack enemies, and then the red one can pick up keys. To aid you in all of this, there is a map station that will let you look around. Now typically you're not too rushed at the start, as the kids tend to be locked off and you'll have to let them out first. But that isn't always guaranteed, and this is where the health comes into play, as both you and them can be hurt, so you will want to collect the hearts. But these also do double duty in a particularly nasty way, as if you want to save the game, you'll have to spend 20 points of health, which in itself wouldn't be so bad if there was an option to restart a level, and there isn't. Your only option is to restart the whole game or load up a previous save. And with there being 60 levels in total, this will take you a while to finish. The Skeleton Krew are rocking up now, as technically a 2D shooter. Now I could have gone with the more obvious Banshee, but I decided to go with something a little different, which is a core design game that came out in 1995, that was also released for the Mega Drive, but this one does look more detailed. Now we get a choice of 3 heavy metal inspired characters, which we'll use in this isometric style game. Now even with that, I'm still classing this as a 2D title. Now there are a few control options, but I'm using the 2-button mode, where one button will fire and rotate you one way, and the other button will do the same but in reverse. With holding down both buttons, locking you in that direction, even if you do move around the map. But while you're not firing, you can change your aim and then press both buttons at the same time to shoot in that direction. Now it's a bit of an odd setup, but I can get where they're coming from with it, as after a while it does sort of click, and it does work quite well. There are two more actions that are a little bit harder to activate, as you have to double tap the button. One will make you jump, and the other will change your weapon, which will let you use the grenades, which aren't amazing, but they are quite useful for taking out the turrets. Outside of the basic grunts that will start to teleport in later on, there are also some large bosses for you to deal with. And you can do this whole thing in co-op mode with a mate, which will make things a little bit easier. Now in a nice touch, when you die, you get to decide where you come back. So you can use it to avoid firepower or some of the enemies. The levels and the graphical style is quite something, and is quite unique as it wasn't the norm at the time, and I think this just looks awesome to look at, even if it is a little bit cheesy in a way. Now there are multiple levels to explore and monsters to defeat, but it is missing an upgrade system or even power-ups. Guardian is flying in, as we now need to check out some 3D shooters after the 2D ones. And while it might have been more expected to have picked an FPS like Alien Breed 3D or Gloom, I wanted to show a game that ran decently on a basic A1200. And this was developed by Acid and was released in 1994. And is possibly more well known as a CD32 title, but it did also come to the A1200, as both machines were obviously equipped with the AGA chipset. Now this is a 3D rendered game with some nice chunky polygons for the craft, enemies and bullets, and quite often people think of this as the Amiga's answer to Star Fox or Starwing. But I think it shares far more in common with games like Defender, as your goal is to take out a specific chip that is dropping bombs on our buildings, and hey, that's my job to accidentally blow them up, not yours. Now you can control this game with both a mouse, which is quite the experience, as you'll still need to use the keyboard for some of the controls, or via a joypad, with the CD32 pad being the obvious choice as it supports all the buttons that the game wants. And it does want a lot, as your craft is quite manoeuvrable in this mostly full 3D environment. Now I would say that this game does suffer some of the common problems from the smaller studios, and that is it starts off extremely difficult. The first few levels should be trying to ease you into the controls and working out what to do, but instead you get craft teleporting in to start shooting at you pretty much from the off. And while all this is going on, you're having to work out the two radar screens to work out where those specific craft are that you need to take out. And then it just gets harder from here on out. It's less a difficulty curve and more of a launch ramp. Although on occasion those bombers will drop power-ups. But you're gonna have to be fast, as if you're not, then they will vanish after a short amount of time. But if you do get them, then it might restore your shield, which can be drained very quickly by the almost kamikaze style baddies, and those will just keep spawning in, by the way. Or it might give you more smart bombs, homing missiles, or even gun upgrades. But seeing that you tend to lose the gun upgrades when you die, you're not going to see it all that often. But if you do manage to make it further into the game, then you'll get to take on the motherships, which is a surprisingly easy thing to do compared to everything else the game has thrown at us. Pierre is out for lunch, as a rare AGA-only platformer. Weirdly, there wasn't too many of these, with a few games like Marvin's Marvelous Adventure and those Disney ports being the major exception. Released by Mindscape in 1994, this also showed up on the SNES, and it's a bit of an arcade throwback platformer, as you have to go around knocking out the enemies, in this instance food, and then capturing them in your net. You can then take these ingredients and then drop them in a cell. Although I'm not too sure I'd be happy with the idea of eating something made out of cheese that was walking around. That doesn't seem right. But before you can do any of this, you're going to have to find your net first, which might not always be right next to you. You'll also need to find a weapon, like the bags of flour. Now, it is possible to net those foods while they're just walking around, but it is harder to do. And you can also stun them by jumping on their heads. Now, each level has you collecting a minimum number of ingredients, and once they're deposited, a door will open up somewhere for you to then finish the level. Now, this does commit one of my platforming sins, and that is to have an ice world at the very start. And while the movement physics is fine when you're at the bottom of the level, it gets progressively slippier as you get to the top. Thankfully, the game does start off quite simple, with just really the time limit being the biggest issue. That and obviously learning the controls, which is a little bit more difficult if you're playing it with a single button joystick, as you have to hold the fire button to use the net, which makes quickly scooping up those ingredients with the net a little bit more difficult. So this is much nicer with a 2-button or even a CD32 pad, even if it does mean you're still limited to up to jump. Now, as you go on, evil veg will start to show up and cause you issues. You can still knock them out by hitting them with your main weapon, but you can't grab them with the net, so they'll always be around the level, so it is better to hit and run, or just try and avoid them altogether. There's also this nasty chef who will come and open up the cage and let your veggies out, which will then require you to close it again before you can start filling it up. XTreme Racing speeds in to give us a racing title. And while I'm partial to Roadkill with its great art style and classic top-down gameplay, this is definitely the more advanced and possibly the more interesting game to look at. Created by Sil Tuna, it was released in 1995 and is more or less a Mario Kart inspired game with its own wacky cast of characters that I don't think really makes too much of a difference. But unlike something like Street Racer, which was also an AGA only game, this is going for a more Mode 7 style track, which is quite fancy, and you can even run it in higher resolution modes if you've got the extra resources. The game is split up into cups, much like Mario Kart, with set tracks and each being split up by their own speed classes. But unlike Mario Kart, I don't think this handles as well, as this has one of our favourite nemesises, issues with balancing, and this is mostly down to how the tracks are designed, as this is the first track of the first cup, so you'd think they'll try and design it to ease you into the game a little bit. But I feel that they've gone out of their way to make sure that some of those items are just where you're likely to be driving, and the handling model will make it quite difficult to change your direction when you notice them, And some of those ramps I swear have been designed to launch you into those obstacles as well. But it's not all bad, as we also have the question marks that you can drive over to get power-ups. Now these can range from turbos to missiles to sheep? Okay. And the only way to keep going in this mode is to place in the top 3. But there's also a championship mode, where you'll get points for where you place in each race. And you'll also find money on the tracks. And these can be used to upgrade your car, which is something that I really approve of. The various locations do look great, even if they can be a little bit confusing at times. Driving around that beach with the water, it wasn't particularly easy to work out where you had to go at times. And obviously they absolutely filled those tracks with things to hit, so after the spin out, it can be quite difficult to work out where it is you're meant to be going. The Speris Legacy wanders in to break all of our pots to try and find more RPGs for the machine, as while there were a few, pretty much each of them was a different style. But what wasn't too common on the Amiga was this style of action RPG. Created by Binary Emotions, it was released in 1995, and this obviously takes its inspiration from Zelda, from the top-down view to even starting asleep in bed. Now this is best played with the CD32 pad, as it does use quite a few keys otherwise, and you'll start off with no weapons, so you'll have to go out and talk to the various villagers. It's interesting to see how much of this has changed from the demos that I've seen previously, as they simplified so much of the interface. Gone is the clunky pop-up list, now you can just directly interact with the villagers as well as the chests. And after a quick chat with the king, and obviously petting the doggies, we go off to try and find a sword. Which turned out to be far easier than then trying to find the shield afterwards. And I had no idea that this wall could be broken. I swear none of the villagers even hinted at this. What does feel interesting is some of the throwbacks, like having a score, which feels completely pointless. But what is far more useful and welcome is the leveling system, which as expected will require you to take out various monsters, and as it goes up, so will your health. Now you'll have to navigate this maze with teleporters and switches, with the elusive shield being our first prize. And with that under our belts, we can now go out and explore the world, where there's a full map for you to get into. There's multiple towns and areas to visit, all while you try and track down the evil son of the king. Reshoot.R flies in blasting as our little extra, as there are still modern AGA only games being made, possibly more now than back in the day, and many of them are targeting the base hardware, and with some even coming out on floppy disks, much like this one. It's a game by Spielschneiber that was released in 2019, and it's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up. Now it might start off a little basic, with your simple ship having to shoot at asteroids, but things will ramp up very quickly, particularly when you start to get the speed ups. And then you'll have to deal with these ice stalks that will start to shoot at you, and then before you know it, crazy effects are going on in the background, while you try and fight to get the weapon upgrades, as those double as your health, as you have a single life. So when you're on that default gun, it's a tricky time for all involved. And going down the weapons also means losing out on some of those speed upgrades that you've gotten, so it is a real double whammy when you take a hit. And I tend to find that it's a quick series of steps from getting hit once to getting hit multiple times and dying. Now I do think this game could have been a little bit more generous with its hitbox, as it does feel it actually extends outside of your craft, making it particularly difficult to navigate around some of those asteroid fields. And while all of this is going on, the music in the background keeps pounding out, with sound effects playing at the same time. And things look absolutely great with all the explosions going on. And every so often you'll get these little clips where the story will take place. This is the second of what is currently 3 games, all of which you can buy brand new right now from APC and TCP. And there we have it, what I think should be an interesting bunch of games that you should go and check out. Now not all of them really showed off the power of the AGA hardware, but a few I think really did. And if you think there's any that I should check out, let me know in the comments, as this wasn't an exhaustive list of all the games. So until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was the power of Aga, and this was Goldfish on Games.
Speed up.